Airline Loyalty Programs, the Complete Economic Analysis. This is an independent analysis of what I consider the strangest large business hiding in plain sight, the Airline Frequent Flyer Program. My thesis, stated up front so you can hold me to it, the major American airlines are no longer airlines that happen to run loyalty programs. They are private central banks that run airlines as a redemption mechanism. The currency they issue, the mile, costs a fraction of a cent to create. It sells for about 2 cents. And it is settled later in a product that would often otherwise go unsold. The customers of this bank are not travelers. They are credit card issuers who in 2025 paid Delta alone $8.2 billion for the privilege of distributing Delta's currency. Over the next 2 hours, I'm going to show you the working, the actual cost per mile from airline filings, the actual prices banks pay. The moment in 2020 when the market was forced to admit that every major American loyalty program was worth more than the airline that owned it. And the stories, the man who bought unlimited first class for life and cost American Airlines $1 million a year, the engineer who bought 12,000 cups of pudding, the rabbi who lost 9-0 at the Supreme Court, and the airline whose points died with it in May of 2026. Ground rules. Every load-bearing number traces to a real source consulted in August 2026. Where a figure is an estimate, I say so. And at the end, I'll tell you exactly what evidence would prove me wrong. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Accident. Every durable financial structure I know of was invented as a temporary patch. The frequent flyer program is the purest case I have ever studied. To understand why it exists at all, you have to start with what American aviation looked like before October of 1978. Until that moment, the airlines of the United States were, in effect, a cartel administered by a government agency called the Civil Aeronautics Board. Washington set the fares. Washington assigned the routes. If you wanted to fly from Chicago to Denver, every airline charged the same price because the price was the law. So airlines competed on the only things left: the width of the seat, the quality of the steak, the smile of the crew. Loyalty programs did not exist because they had no function. You cannot win a customer on price when price is illegal. United Airlines had been quietly tracking its best customers since the 1950s, but tracking was recognition, not reward. Nobody paid you to come back because nobody needed to. Deregulation changed the physics overnight. The Airline Deregulation Act passed in October 1978, fares floated free, new airlines swarmed in and undercut the incumbents, and a seat on a plane became what it economically always was, a commodity. And it is no coincidence that every early experiment in loyalty dates from immediately after that moment. Texas International Airlines built the first true mileage tracking rewards program in 1979. Western Airlines launched something called the Travel Bank in 1980. The pieces were on the table. Someone just had to assemble them at scale. That someone was American Airlines, and the date was May 1st, 1981. And here is the detail that matters. American had a weapon nobody else had. It was called SABRE, the computerized reservation system American had built with IBM, running since 1960. SABRE could do something genuinely revolutionary for its era. It could remember individual passengers, millions of them, and what they flew. Punch cards and paper coupons could never track miles at scale. A real-time database could. So American's president, Bob Crandall, with his marketing chief Thomas Plaskett and a loyalty consultant named Hal Brierley, did something wonderfully sneaky. They mined SABRE to find Americans' best customers before the program even launched. About 130,000 of the airline's most frequent flyers, plus roughly 60,000 members of the Admiral's Club Lounge, received letters in the mail with AAdvantage account numbers already assigned, before competitors even knew the program existed. You will often hear this told as 150,000 best customers. The sourced breakdown is 130 plus 60. The logo, incidentally, was designed by Massimo Vignelli, the same man who designed the New York City subway map. Plaskett told the New York Times in 1982 exactly what he was doing, in 10 words that remain the thesis statement of the entire industry 45 years later. Quote, "We are attempting to build brand loyalty in a commodity market." Now, how long did Americans' advantage last? Days. United launched its own program, MileagePlus, within about a week. Within 2 months, Braniff, Continental, and TWA had all declared programs. Delta followed the same year. Crandall himself reportedly regarded the whole thing as a copyable gimmick that would confer no lasting advantage, and he was completely right. It was copied instantly. And it conquered the world anyway, because the thing it created, a switching cost bolted onto a commodity, was simply too effective for any airline to unilaterally disarm. That is the game theory of loyalty in one sentence. Nobody can afford to have it, and nobody can afford not to. But I want to spend the rest of this chapter on a different story from that same year, because it contains the first recorded lesson in what happens when an airline misprices its own promises. This is the story of the AAirpass. In 1981, American Airlines was nearly broke. This was the era of double-digit interest rates. Borrowing money cost 13% and up. So American came up with a scheme to borrow from its customers instead. It was called the AirPass, unlimited first-class travel anywhere American flew for the rest of your life for a one-time payment of $250,000. A companion pass, so you could bring anyone you liked, cost $150,000 more. Crandall's logic was simple. Selling flights forward, at $250,000 a pop, was cheaper than borrowing at 13%. Only 66 unlimited lifetime passes were ever sold. The buyers included Michael Dell, Mark Cuban, and the baseball legend Willie Mays. Mark Cuban has called his one of the best purchases he ever made. But 2 buyers took the contract perfectly literally, and they are the ones history remembers. Steve Rothstein, a Chicago investment banker, bought his pass on October 1, 1987, for exactly $233,509.93. He added the companion pass 2 years later. And then he spent 21 years living on American Airlines. He flew thousands of flights. He would fly to London for lunch. He gave his companion seat to strangers at the gate. Sometimes he booked the seat next to him under the name Bag Rothstein, so his bag could ride in first class and nobody would sit beside him. The second man was Jacques Vroom, a catalog marketing consultant from Dallas. He bought his pass in December 1989 for $356,000, including the companion option, and over the following 2 decades, he accumulated nearly 38 million miles. He was famous to the crews. He reportedly flew to Europe just to have lunch with a friend. Around 2007, American's internal unit, it was literally called the Revenue Integrity Unit, did the arithmetic and concluded that Rothstein and Vroom were each costing the airline more than $1 million per year. A $250,000 one-time payment against $1 million a year in perpetuity. So in 2008, American revoked both passes mid-journey on allegations of fraudulent use. Rothstein was handed his termination letter at Chicago O'Hare in December. Vroom was ambushed with his at London Heathrow in July. Both men sued. The litigation ended in confidential settlements around 2012, and the passes stayed dead. By 1994, the price of a new pass had reached $1.01 million, and American stopped selling them entirely. In 2004, the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog offered one as a $3 million fantasy gift. Nobody bought it. Bob Crandall's verdict on the whole affair, verified word for word from the Lowe's Angels Times investigation, deserves to be carved over the door of every loyalty program on Earth. Quote, "It soon became apparent that the public was smarter than we were." Hold on to that sentence, because it is the key to the next 2 hours. The entire 45-year history of frequent flyer programs is a cycle. The airline makes a generous promise in units it controls, discovers the public is smarter than it is, and then quietly rewrites the promise. The AirPass was simply the version where the promise, unlimited lifetime seats, was written in a currency the airline could not devalue. Every program design decision since 1981 has been, one way or another, about making sure that mistake never happens again. Chapter 2: The Machine. Before we get to the money, and the money is coming, I promise, we need the mechanics. Because you cannot understand the economics of a mile until you see it as a manufactured product, with a production side and a settlement side. So in this chapter, I want to walk you through the machine, how a mile is born and how a mile dies. A mile is born in one of three factories. Factory number 1 is the airplane itself. This is the original factory, and for most of the program's history, it worked on a beautifully simple rule: you earned what you flew. A 1,000-mile flight earned 1,000 miles, whether you paid $99 for the ticket or $1,500. Think about that inversion for a moment. The bargain hunter on the fire sale fare earned exactly the same reward as the business traveler on the walk-up fare who paid 15 times more. The programs were rewarding distance when the business ran on dollars. It took the industry more than 3 decades to unwind that mistake. Southwest went revenue-based in 2011. Delta announced the switch in February 2014 and flipped it on January 1st, 2015. 5 miles per dollar of fare for ordinary members, up to 11 miles per dollar for top elites. United followed within weeks. And American, the company that invented the modern program, was the very last in August 2016. The frequent flyer program had officially become a frequent buyer program. Elite status followed the same path: dollars spent, not miles flown. Factory number 2, and today by far the largest, is the credit card. Banks buy miles wholesale from airlines and dispense them to you per dollar of card spend. By the airline industry's own polling analysis, roughly 63% of all miles earned by consumers in 2022 came from airline credit cards, not from flying. Well over half of all frequent flyer miles are now earned on the ground. This factory is the subject of Chapter 5 because it is where essentially all of the money is. Factory number 3 is everything else: hotels, rental cars, shopping portals, dining programs, mortgages at one point, and in one glorious case in 1999, pudding, a story I will tell properly later in this series. Mechanically, all of these work the same way. The partner pays the airline roughly 1 to 2 cents per mile and hands the mile to the customer as a premium. So that's birth, now death. A mile dies in one of 2 graves. Grave number 1 is redemption. Overwhelmingly, that means award travel, free flights, plus upgrades, and merchandise at rates you should never accept. To give you the scale, Delta disclosed that in 2024, about 10% of the passenger miles flown on its planes were people traveling on award tickets, roughly 30 million free tickets in a single year. Grave number 2 is breakage. Breakage is the industry's term for miles that die unredeemed, expired, or stranded forever in dormant accounts, in amounts too small to use. And I want you to notice something about a dead mile: it is pure profit. The airline sold that mile to a bank for cash, and now it never has to deliver anything at all. Breakage was historically enormous, and it is structurally declining, and the reason why turns out to be about bank economics rather than consumer kindness. I'll quantify all of it in Chapter 4. 2 more pieces of scaffolding, and then a story. First, alliances. Star Alliance was founded in May 1997 by 5 airlines including United and Lufthansa. Oneworld followed in 1999, built around American and British Airways. SkyTeam came in 2000, around Delta and Air France. What alliances did for the mile was globalize it. A mile in any member program can be earned on 20-plus airlines and burned on 20-plus airlines, with the airlines invoicing each other behind the curtain at negotiated rates. The mile went from a company script to something closer to an international currency. Second, and this is the piece most people miss entirely, the exchange rate regime changed. For roughly 34 years, redemption ran on something called an award chart, a published, fixed menu of prices. The iconic entry on that menu barely moved for decades: 25,000 miles for a domestic round trip in economy. A chart made the mile feel like a real currency with a posted exchange rate. You knew what your savings were worth. Then the charts died. Delta stopped publishing any award chart at all in 2015, the first major carrier to go fully dynamic. United killed its charts for travel from November 15, 2019. American, last once again, went fully dynamic in April 2023. Today, the price of a flight in miles is whatever the airline's algorithm says at the moment you search. Read that back through an economist's eyes. The issuer of the currency now sets the exchange rate one transaction at a time, with no published price level and no obligation to tell you when it changes. So here is the machine in full. 3 factories, 2 graves, a global clearing system, and a floating exchange rate controlled entirely by the issuer. An economist looking at that diagram does not see a marketing program. They see a central bank, one with a printing press, no inflation mandate, and no independent auditor of the price level. Now the story, because the liability problem announced itself much earlier than people think. In 1987, Delta, freshly merged with Western Airlines, teamed up with American Express on a triple miles promotion. Every competitor matched it. By the peak of the war in 1988, airlines were offering up to 6 times normal mileage on domestic routes. A business traveler could earn a free future trip from a single bonus-laden round trip. This is the moment the mileage run was born, people flying purely to harvest miles, the flight itself irrelevant. And then came the hangover, and the hangover built the modern program. 3 defensive technologies emerged from that war that define loyalty to this day. 1. Expiration dates. Miles in the early programs never expired. Expiration was invented at the end of the 80s specifically because of the liability panic. 2. Capacity controls, blackout dates, limited award seats, and the 2-tier award. United invented the SABRE award in 1988, half price but capacity controlled. That split in mutated dynamic form survives today. And 3, the most consequential, airlines discovered they could devalue retroactively. American applied its new restrictions to miles customers had already earned. Illinois members sued, and the case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court as American Airlines versus Wolens decided in January 1995. The court ruled that federal airline deregulation law preempts state consumer protection claims against a loyalty program. All that survives is plain breach of contract. The courts can enforce only whatever the airline itself promised in writing. The airlines drew the obvious conclusion. They rewrote their contracts so that the central promise is that everything can change, at any time, at the airline's sole discretion. That fine print you clicked agree to whenever you joined a frequent flyer program, it is the fossil of the 1988 mileage war. The machine learned, very early, to make its promises revocable. Keep that in mind as we now open the books and find out what this machine actually earns. Chapter 3, The Mint. This is the chapter the entire analysis rests on, so I'm going to show you the arithmetic slowly. 3 questions. What does a mile cost the airline? What does a mile sell for? And what is a mile worth to the person holding it? Get those 3 numbers, and the whole business model falls open like a watch. Question 1. What does it cost an airline to honor a mile? The classical answer is called the incremental cost argument, and it goes like this. When someone redeems 25,000 miles for a seat that would otherwise have flown empty, what does the airline actually give up? The plane was flying anyway. The crew was paid anyway. The gate was rented anyway. The true marginal cost is the extra fuel to carry one more body, the soda, the insurance, the booking fee. That's it. And this is not a theoretical argument. It was the airline's own official accounting for decades. Analysis of American Airlines' own disclosures found that the incremental cost of a 25,000-mile domestic award ticket was roughly $35 in 2015. $35 for a 25,000-mile ticket. That works out to about 0.14 cents per mile, not 14 cents. 0.14 cents, a seventh of a penny. Industry estimates generally put the marginal cost between 1/10 of a cent and 1 cent, depending on how full the flights are. Now, the caveat is real, and the airlines price it with terrifying precision. On a full flight, the true cost of giving away a seat is the fare it displaced. American's 2021 Bond Investor Presentation contains a slide I find remarkable in its candor. It shows award pricing on the Dallas to Las Vegas route varying by time of day, according to what American explicitly calls cash displacement risk. The 6 a.m. flight, which nobody wants to pay cash for, 10,000 miles. The 5 p.m. flight, which everyone wants, 18,000 miles. Same route, same day, same product. Dynamic award pricing is displacement management. The award seat is the airline's distressed inventory outlet, run in-house, and priced to the minute. Question 2. What does a mile sell for? Here we have real numbers from filings. In 2015, American sold roughly 183 billion miles to third parties for about $2.25 billion. That is 1.2 cents per mile, split, in the accounting, into about 0.8 cents for marketing, which is booked as revenue immediately, and 0.4 cents for transportation, which is deferred until the mile is flown. Today's rates are confidential, but the best industry estimates put them at 1.5 cents and up for the major currencies, and the consultancy IdeaWorks estimates that American Express pays Delta about 2.1 cents per spend-earned mile. That's an estimate, but a well-informed one. And here's the thing, you don't have to rely on estimates. Because in June of 2020, United Airlines filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission what I consider the single most honest sentence ever published about this business. It appears in the MileagePlus financing documents as an illustrative example of how the program works. I'm going to walk you through it nearly verbatim. A customer spends $10,000 with a partner and earns 15,000 miles. The partner buys those 15,000 miles from MileagePlus at 2 cents per mile, $300 of revenue to the program. Later, the customer redeems those 15,000 miles for a United flight. And MileagePlus buys that seat from United at 1 cent per mile, $150. And then the filing says, in United's own words, for a 50% profit. Sell the currency at 2 cents. Settle it at 1 cent. The issuer wrote that down in a public securities filing with the phrase 50% profit included. Whenever anyone tells you the economics of frequent flyer programs are mysterious, remember that United filed the answer with the SEC. Question 3. What is the mile worth to the person holding it? The Points Guy's valuations as of July 2026. American and United miles, 1.4 cents. Delta miles, 1.2 cents. NerdWallet's 2026 analysis puts every major American domestic program between 1.2 and 1.4 cents. There's a floor near 1 cent because fixed-value redemption options, like Delta's Pay with Miles feature, let you apply miles toward any ticket at about a cent each. And notice the neat symmetry. The internal transfer price United pays itself for a redeemed seat is also exactly 1 cent. The floor under your miles and the cost of the airline's promise are the same number. Premium cabin redemptions can return 2, 3, 5 cents per mile against the cash fare. That's the entire premise of the Points hobbyist media. But I gently note what's really happening there. The airline is disposing of distressed premium inventory at low displacement cost, and the value is imputed against fares the redeemer would never have paid in cash. The lottery tickets are real, but the house prints them. Now assemble the stack, because the alignment of these numbers is the business model. Marginal cost to produce and settle a mile, roughly 1/10 of a cent to 1 cent. The internal transfer price of the redeemed seat, about 1 cent. The accounting value on the balance sheet, about 1 cent. The price to the banks, 1.5 to 2 cents. The perceived value to the member, 1.2 to 1.4 cents with premium lottery tickets on top. Every layer of this stack is happy. The member believes the mile is worth more than what the bank effectively paid for it. The bank profitably buys engagement and card spend. And the airline pockets the spread between 2 cents and 1 cent, plus the spread between 1 cent and its marginal cost, plus outright breakage on the miles that die unredeemed. 3 stacked margins: the sale margin, the settlement margin, and the seigniorage of unredeemed currency. United's own documents put the MileagePlus profit margin at 34%. American's presentation showed AAdvantage operating cash flow at 53% of mile sales in 2019. And here is my favorite number in the whole subject. In 2020, the pandemic year, when redemptions collapsed but card spending continued, AAdvantage's cash margin didn't fall. It rose to 77%. The planes were parked in the desert. The mint kept printing. There's a name for this in economics: seigniorage. It is the profit a currency issuer earns because money costs less to make than it trades for. The United States Treasury earns it on every dollar bill. Airlines earn it on every mile, with 2 upgrades no sovereign currency issuer enjoys. First, their currency erodes or expires at the issuer's discretion. And second, the goods the currency must ultimately buy are priced by the issuer too, one search at a time. The Economist magazine famously calculated, back in 2005, that the world's 14 trillion unredeemed frequent flyer miles, generously valued, were worth more than all the United States dollar bills in circulation. By 2018, McKinsey put the pile at 30 trillion miles. Current industry estimates run to 35 trillion. By one famous measure, the frequent flyer mile is the largest private currency humanity has ever created. And it is run with less monetary discipline than the Argentine peso, by design, and at a 50% margin. Chapter 4: The Ledger. If the last chapter was the mint, this one is the ledger. Accounting sounds like the boring chapter. I promise you it is not. Because the ledger tells you things the marketing never will, including the day the accounting profession, not the airlines, revealed what a mile is actually worth. For the first 37 years of the industry, American accounting rules let airlines book flight-earned miles at what was called incremental cost. Remember that number from last chapter, the $35 award ticket, the 7th of a penny per mile? Airlines were allowed to carry their entire mileage liability at that number. A program with hundreds of billions of banked miles could sit on the balance sheet as a rounding error. A 2004 industry survey found about $3.2 billion of frequent flyer liability across 14 carriers, for what was even then one of the largest outstanding currencies on Earth. American's 2015 reporting showed a frequent flyer liability of about $2.45 billion, of which only about $1.2 billion was actual estimated cost. The rest was deferred profit, waiting to be collected. Then the rules changed. International accounting moved first in 2008 and 9. And for American companies, a standard called ASC 606 took effect in 2018, and it killed the incremental cost method entirely. From that point on, miles are a real obligation, measured at what the accountants call equivalent ticket value, roughly what a mile actually buys. Part of every ticket sale and most of every bank payment must be deferred as a liability and only recognized as revenue when the award is actually flown. Reported loyalty liabilities exploded overnight, without a single flight changing, without a dollar of cash moving. And I consider that repricing event the clearest public demonstration in this whole story. A mile's real value, about a cent, exceeds its production cost, about a tenth of a cent, by roughly a factor of 10. It took the accounting profession to say it out loud. So how big is the IOU today? Here are the year-end 2024 balances, which I verified directly against the annual reports filed with the SEC. American Airlines, AAdvantage loyalty liability, $10.05 billion. During 2024, American deferred $4.5 billion of new mile value and recognized $3.8 billion as awards were flown. Delta, SkyMiles deferred revenue, $8.8 billion. United, MileagePlus deferred revenue, $7.4 billion. Add them up, roughly $26 billion of prepaid travel that the 3 biggest American airlines owe their members. $26 billion, a liability larger than the market value of most airlines on the planet. And it is a liability with a property that no bond, no bank deposit, no gift card has. The issuer controls, unilaterally, both the redemption price of the instrument and its expiration policy. Delta's own auditor, Ernst & Young, formally flags mileage breakage estimation as what accountants call a critical audit matter. That is auditor speak for, this judgment is big enough to move earnings and soft enough to argue about. Which brings us to breakage, the fraction of miles that die unredeemed. Let me give you the actual disclosed history, because airlines rarely say these numbers out loud. United assumed 24% of miles would expire unused in 2012, 16% by 2015, 18% in its 2019 financing documents. Alaska disclosed 17.4% in 2019, and the accounting lever is wonderfully direct. When Hawaiian Airlines adopted a 20% breakage assumption in 2007, the change alone added $5 million to operating income with a stroke of a pen. When American lowered its breakage estimate in 2011, it took a $43 million revenue hit. Assume more of your currency dies, book more profit sooner. That is the machine's throttle, and management holds it. Now here is the strategic surprise. Breakage is trending down, and the airlines are choosing that. Delta abolished mileage expiration entirely in 2011. Southwest and United dropped it in 2019. Americans' miles survive with any account activity every 24 months or just by holding the credit card. Stop and ask, why would a currency issuer voluntarily give up seigniorage? Why let fewer miles die when every dead mile is pure profit? Because the bank pays for engagement. A cardholder whose miles expired last year cancels the card this year. The co-brand machine, the machine we open in the next chapter, needs 100 million people who believe their currency is alive and accumulating. So the airlines traded breakage profit for card volume. I find that trade one of the most revealing tells in the entire subject. It tells you which revenue stream is worth more. CBS News has reported that in some programs, only about 8% of miles ever get redeemed. I treat that as the extreme end of the range, with the big programs realistically in the 10 to 20% breakage range today and falling. That's my estimate from the disclosed trajectory. Either way, the analytics firm Value Penguin tallied $27.5 billion of unused miles sitting at the top 5 American programs at the end of 2020. One more ledger detail, and it matters for everything downstream. Every co-brand credit card contract is split in the accounting into 2 parts. The transportation component, the future flight the mile represents, is deferred as we discussed. But the marketing component, the bank's payment for the brand license, access to the member list, the advertising value, is recognized as revenue immediately, the moment the cash arrives. And the marketing component is enormous. In 2024, American recognized $3.25 billion of immediate marketing revenue from its card deals. Delta booked $3.3 billion the same way. Roughly half of the bank's check flows straight into current period profit, at close to 100% margin. Payment not for flying anyone anywhere, but for granting access to a brand and a mailing list. So let me close the ledger with the picture it paints. On one side, $26 billion of IOUs to members, denominated in a currency the issuer can devalue at will, audited under assumptions the issuer sets. On the other side, billions in immediate, nearly costless marketing revenue, plus a settlement obligation that costs about half of what the currency sold for. If you saw this balance sheet with the company name redacted, you would not guess it belonged to an airline. You would guess it belonged to a bank, a rather aggressive one. In the next chapter, we meet the actual banks and find out why they happily pay $8 billion a year to be on the other side of this trade. Chapter 5, The Bank. Now we meet the customer who matters, not you, the bank. I'm going to start with the flagship relationship in world aviation, Delta and American Express, because the numbers are disclosed, they are verified, and they are astonishing. Here is what Amex has paid Delta in cash, year by year, from Delta's own results releases. 2010, roughly $2 billion. 2018, $3.4 billion. 2019, $4.1 billion. 2021, $4 billion. 2022, $5.5 billion. 2023, $6.8 billion. 2024, $7.4 billion. 2025, $8.2 billion, about 14% of Delta's entire operating revenue. Delta has guided to roughly $9 billion for 2026 and has stated a long-term target of $10 billion a year. One warning if you go checking these numbers: they circulate on the internet shifted a year early. The sequence I just gave you is the verified one. In November 2024, Delta held an investor day that was co-headlined, and I want you to sit with this, by the chief executive of American Express. An airline's investor day opened by a bank. At that event, Delta's CEO Ed Bastian said, quote, "The spend that we have is an approximated 1% of the entire US GDP going on at the Delta American Express card." And Delta's president, Glenn Hohenstein, described the road ahead in a sentence I love for its casual confidence. Getting from $7 billion to $10 billion seems a lot easier than getting from $2 billion to $7 billion. Can we cross-check that 1% of GDP claim? We can, from the bank's side, because Amex's 2025 annual report is blunt. The Delta portfolio represents approximately 13% of American Express's worldwide billed business and approximately 21% of all Amex card member loans. 13% of $1.67 trillion of billings is about $217 billion of annual card spend on Delta plastic. One airline's credit cards are an eighth of American Express and a fifth of its entire loan book. The rest of the industry runs the same machine. American Airlines collected $5.2 billion from card partners in 2023, $6.1 billion in 2024, $6.2 billion in 2025. And in December 2024, it signed a 10-year exclusive deal, making CD the sole issuer from 2026, with management projecting roughly 10% annual growth toward $10 billion a year. United's Chase relationship, renewed through 2029, showed its skeleton in the 2020 financing documents. $5.3 billion of 2019 cash sales, 12% of United's total revenue, and here is the stat to memorize. 71% of that cash came from third parties, mostly the bank. 29% came from actual flying. Even the small programs are billion-dollar card businesses. Alaska's deal with Bank of America, about $1.5 billion a year. JetBlue's with Barclays, over $1 billion. Southwest booked $2.2 billion in 2024 just for the immediately recognized marketing half of its Chase deal. So the obvious question: why do American banks pay sums that would make a European banker faint? One regulatory quirk. In the United States, credit card interchange, the fee merchants pay when you swipe, is uncapped. The average American credit card interchange rate is about 2.35%. Amex's average merchant discount rate was 2.24% in 2025. In 2010, the Durbin Amendment capped those fees for debit cards, but deliberately exempted credit cards. That carve-out, one clause in one amendment, is the legal foundation of the entire American co-brand economy. Run the arithmetic on Delta Amex. 2.24% of $217 billion of spend is roughly $4.9 billion a year in merchant fees alone. Add annual card fees, the Delta Reserve card costs $650 a year, and interest, at Amex's 8.1% net yield on the 21% of its loan book that is Delta cardholders. Who actually funds the miles? Merchants, which is to say, everyone who buys anything at every store, whether they have ever set foot on a plane or not. The interchange fee is baked into retail prices. The frequent flyer program is, at root, a distribution of unregulated merchant fees laundered through an airline brand into a currency consumers love. Jay Sorensen, the industry's leading ancillary revenue consultant, put it precisely. American Express, Chase, and Citi have become the largest single customers for their airline partners. And the European counterfactual proves the mechanism. In 2015, the European Union capped credit interchange at 0.3%, roughly one-eighth the American level. Result: rich airline credit cards simply do not exist in Europe. Same airlines, same passengers, same human psychology. Different interchange law, no money machine. I find that the single cleanest natural experiment in this entire subject. Now, what exactly does the bank's check buy? Southwest's annual report enumerates it. The points themselves, the brand license, access to the member list, advertising, marketing services. IdeaWorks reconstructed the Delta Amex flows for 2023. These are estimates that reconcile to the disclosed $6.8 billion total. About $4.9 billion buying spend-earned miles at around 2.1 cents each. About $300 million buying sign-up bonus miles at a discount. And my favorite line item, about $600 million paying Delta for cardholder perks. The free checked bag, the priority boarding. Understand what that means. When your airline credit card gets you a free checked bag, the bank bought that bag for you. Every perk on the card has an invoice behind it, and the invoice goes to the bank. Here's the strategic accounting that reframes the whole industry. In 2025, Amex's check to Delta equaled roughly 1.4 times Delta's entire adjusted operating income. The credit card outturned the airline. Americans' $6.2 billion of card cash was about 4 times its adjusted operating income. Without the bank checks, the flying businesses, taken alone, range from marginal to deeply unprofitable. Reuters' 2026 framing quoted the National Consumers League. The modern airline is a gigantic rewards program that just happens to fly airplanes. You may have heard a famous quote attributed to American's former CEO Doug Parker, "We don't make money flying planes." I could not verify that he ever said it, so I won't use it. The verified numbers make the point better than the fake quote anyway. One last pattern because it completes the picture. The bank as lender of last resort. In 2009, mid-financial crisis, Citibank pre-purchased $1 billion of AAdvantage miles, effectively a secured loan from a bank to an airline, years before Wall Street formalized the idea. In May 2020, JetBlue sold $150 million of points to Barclays for quick liquidity. When an airline hits trouble, its first call is not to the government and not to the bond market. It's to the bank that buys its miles, because the bank cannot afford for the program to die either. Which sets up the greatest stress test in the industry's history. In 2020, the planes stopped flying entirely, and the airlines had to pawn something. What they pawned, and what the pawnbroker said it was worth, is the next chapter. It is the moment the mask came off. Chapter 6, The Reveal. Every so often, markets run a natural experiment that settles an argument forever. For airline loyalty programs, that experiment was the spring of 2020. Passenger revenue fell by more than 90%. The planes were parked in the desert. The airlines were burning tens of millions of dollars a day, and they had to pawn something to survive. What they chose to pawn, and what the pawnbroker said it was worth, is the reveal this entire analysis pivots on. United went first in June 2020. It raised $6.8 billion, $3.8 billion in bonds at 6.5%, plus a $3 billion term loan, secured not by planes, not by routes, but by MileagePlus, the loyalty program. And to sell that deal, United had to do something no major airline had ever done: open the program's books to the public. The disclosures were stunning. 2019 cash sales, $5.3 billion. Program earnings, $1.8 billion at a 34% margin. Over 100 million members. And the deal materials valued MileagePlus at $21.9 billion, 12 times its earnings. Here's the problem with that number. United's entire market capitalization at the time, the whole airline, every plane, every route, every gate, was roughly $10.5 billion. The loyalty program had just been appraised at twice the value of the company that owned it. Delta went next in September 2020 and went bigger. $9 billion, upsized from $6.5 billion in 3 days because investors were fighting to get in. It was, at the time, the largest debt raise in the history of aviation. And I want you to pause on the interest rates. $2.5 billion at 4.5%, $3.5 billion at 4.75%. A junk-rated airline, in the middle of a pandemic, with its planes grounded, borrowed $9 billion at 4.5%, when its own unsecured debt had priced above 7% earlier that same year. The collateral that made the difference: SkyMiles. 2019 cash sales of about $6.1 billion, $4.1 billion of it from American Express alone. Analysts valued the program around $26 billion against Delta's roughly $20 billion market cap. American went last and biggest in March 2021. $10 billion against AAdvantage, upsized from $7.5 billion, used partly to repay the United States Treasury's emergency loan. The disclosed third-party appraisals valued AAdvantage at $19.5 to $31.5 billion. American's market cap in mid-2020 had been about $6.6 billion. Even the low end of the appraisal was 3 times the entire airline. Added up, $25.8 billion borrowed against frequent flyer programs in 9 months. And the comparison the Financial Times drew made the punchline explicit. At these appraisals, the airline inside Delta, the planes, the slots, the brand, the 75,000 employees, was worth roughly negative $6 billion. On the market's own numbers, every major American carrier was a wildly profitable currency issuer strapped to a loss-making transportation device. Now, how do you actually borrow $20 billion against a marketing program? The structure matters, and it's genuinely elegant. Each airline took the program's intellectual property, the brand, the member data rights, and crucially the co-brand bank contracts, and contributed it to newly created special purpose vehicles, mostly incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Delta's is literally called SkyMiles IP Limited. And then, here's the beautiful part, the airline licensed its own loyalty program back from the vehicle it had just created. Think about what that does. The airline now needs the vehicle's permission to run its own program. If the airline ever went bankrupt and tried to walk away from the debt, it would lose the right to operate the single most profitable thing it owns. The bank payments flow through controlled waterfalls. The bondholders stand first in line. That's the teeth. Were the $20 billion appraisals real? Let me give you both sides honestly, because I hold a nuanced view here. The skeptic's case is strong. The programs are inseparable from the airlines. Strip AAdvantage out of American, and what does the vehicle actually own? A customer list and contracts with American. The value lives in the airline's own future performance, so appraising the program separately is partly double counting. The comparisons were also flattered by pandemic-crushed stock prices. American at $6.6 billion was priced for possible bankruptcy. By 2026, Delta's market cap, about $47 billion, comfortably exceeded the analyst valuation of SkyMiles again. And what the lenders really bought wasn't a business at all. It was structural seniority, first claim on the airline's most stable cash stream, wrapped so the airline cannot operate without paying. All true, and yet, here is the other side: the debt performed flawlessly. United retired every dollar of its MileagePlus debt by July 2025, roughly 2 years early. Delta paid its 2025 notes on schedule and refinanced the rest at cheaper rates. American amortized on schedule to final maturity in April 2026. With 5 years of hindsight, the bond market's considered verdict is that airline loyalty cash flows are among the most reliable in the industrial economy, more recession-proof than the airlines themselves. In the 2008 financial crisis, United's revenue fell 19%, MileagePlus revenue fell too. In 2020, with aviation and cardiac arrest, AAdvantage's cash margin went up. And the reveal stuck. It changed how the industry finances itself permanently. JetBlue borrowed against its program in 2024. Alaska funded its acquisition of Hawaiian Airlines with $2 billion of loyalty-backed notes. The private equity giant Apollo put €1.5 billion into Air France-KLM's Flying Blue program in 2023 using the same architecture. A fact that had lived quietly in analyst models, one Stifel analyst, Joe DeNardi, had been shouting for years that AAdvantage alone was worth $37 billion, became common knowledge. The program is the business. As I record this, On Point Loyalty's 2026 rankings value SkyMiles at $31.7 billion, the most valuable airline loyalty program on Earth, AAdvantage at $26.7 billion, MileagePlus at $25.3 billion. American Airlines' entire market capitalization is about $6.7 billion. The market now openly, casually, prices one of America's biggest airlines at a quarter of the value of its own coupon scheme. And nobody considers that headline surprising anymore. That normalization, more than any single number, is the story of the last 5 years. The mask didn't just come off in 2020. It never went back on. Chapter 7, The Orphans. If loyalty programs are worth $20 or $30 billion, an obvious idea follows, and clever bankers have had it many times. Spin the program off. Sell shares in the money machine to the public. Let the market pay a fintech multiple instead of an airline multiple and unlock billions in trapped value. It has been tried, seriously, on 4 continents, and every single experiment ended the same way, with the airline buying the program back. Everyone. This chapter is about why, because the failure pattern teaches you more about these economics than the valuations do. The definitive case is Aeroplan, in Canada. Air Canada, restructuring after September 11th, created Aeroplan as a subsidiary in 2002, and in June 2005, floated 12.5% of it on the stock market for $250 million Canadian dollars, the world's first publicly traded frequent flyer program, valued at about $2 billion. The pitch to investors was a contract. Aeroplan had the right to buy Air Canada seats at fixed, favorable prices through 2020, guaranteed margins, gushing dividends. The parent sold down its entire stake by 2008. The vehicle renamed itself Aimia and built a global loyalty conglomerate. For a decade, it was a Canadian yield investor's darling. Then came May the 11th, 2017. Air Canada announced, calmly in a press release, that it would simply not renew. It would build its own loyalty program from 2020. Thank you very much. Aimia's stock fell 63% in one day, from $8.93 to $3.33 between breakfast and dinner. The dividend was suspended within weeks. Air Canada represented roughly 80% of the earnings Aimia reported, and the market repriced 12 years of assumed permanence in a single afternoon. And here is where the story turns from tragedy to farce. 18 months later, a consortium led by Air Canada, with the banks TD and CIBC and Visa, bought Aeroplan back. Price: $450 million Canadian dollars in cash, plus assumption of about $1.9 billion in points liability. But at the very same closing, TD and CIBC paid Air Canada $822 million for future credit card rights, plus $400 million more in prepaid mile purchases. Added up, the bank's payments more than covered the entire purchase price. Air Canada was effectively paid to repossess its own loyalty program, a program the public had bought, in stages, for nearly $700 million. The airline sold the cow, waited, and was paid to take the cow back. The Brazilian experiments ran the same arc, faster. TAM listed its Multiplus program in 2010, raising about 690 million reais. 9 years later, its successor LATAM bought out the minorities and delisted it, because running a unified loyalty strategy with public shareholders in the middle turned out to be impossible. GOL listed its Smiles program in 2013, and this one played the conflict out in broad daylight. In late 2018, GOL unilaterally readjusted the transfer prices between the airline and its own listed loyalty subsidiary. The airline openly reset the terms of trade against its own minority shareholders. By June 2021, Smiles was fully reabsorbed. Australia added the timing morality tail version. Virgin Australia sold 35% of its Velocity program to a private equity firm for $336 million Australian dollars in 2014, then bought it back in December 2019 for $700 million, valuing the program at about $2 billion. 4 months later, Virgin Australia was insolvent in administration. And Velocity, legally a separate entity, technically not in administration, froze all point redemptions anyway. Because a loyalty point is a claim on flights and the flights had stopped. Legal separation protected the corporate shell. It could not protect the point. Even the private equity success story obeys the same gravity. Advent International, one of the smartest investors alive, bought 30% of Avianca's LifeMiles program in 2015 for $344 million. The program ran EBITDA margins around 40%, derived from the rating agency disclosures, and levered up to pay dividends. And the exit? Avianca bought the stake back in 2020 and 2021, the first tranche at a price 17% below what Advent had paid 6 years earlier. 40% margins, and the minority investor exited roughly flat. The gravitational pull got even the professionals. So why does the standalone model fail every time, everywhere? I'll give you my synthesis in 3 parts. First, the airline owns the only thing the program actually needs: seats. Every valuation of a standalone program is, at bottom, capitalizing a seat purchase contract. Every contract has a renewal date. And at renewal, the airline holds all the cards, because it can always credibly threaten to walk away and build its own program, while the program cannot credibly replace the airline. Aeroplan's 63% single-day collapse wasn't a surprise event. It was an option the airline had held all along, finally exercised. Second, the governance conflict is unfixable. The program's sole critical supplier is also its controlling shareholder. Minority investors own a cash machine whose one indispensable input is priced by the person across the table, who also happens to own most of the equity. GOL didn't even pretend otherwise. It repriced the inputs against its own subsidiary in public filings. Third, the cash flows are only fully valuable inside the airline. Separated, they trade at a discount for hold-up risk. Reunited, they collateralize cheap debt, remember the 2020 financings, and feed the operating business. Which is why I read the 2020 American deals as the correct answer to the question the spin-offs had been asking for 15 years. You can monetize the program's value without surrendering control of the seats. Mortgage it, don't sell it. I'll leave you with the irony. The promise of the spin-off era was that a listed loyalty program would be disciplined by its shareholders into treating members well, a currency with outside governance, a central bank with independent directors. What the world got instead is programs fully re-internalized, run as balance sheet instruments of the airlines, with members' interests formally represented by nobody at all. Hold that thought, because in 2 chapters, we're going to see exactly what an unaccountable currency issuer does with its printing press. Chapter 8, The Other Ways. Everything I've shown you so far is the American model. Uncapped merchant fees funneled through co-brand credit cards into 10-figure annual checks. It is the biggest version of this business, but it is not the only one. And the alternatives matter, because they reveal which parts of the machine are universal economics and which parts are just artifacts of American payments regulation. So let's go around the world. Start in Australia, because Qantas is the disclosure gold standard. Alone among major airlines, Qantas has reported its loyalty division as a clean, separate profit segment for 2 decades. It is the closest thing this industry has to a public control experiment, an actual audited answer to the question, what does a loyalty program earn? Here are the numbers. Qantas Loyalty's underlying operating profit, $374 million Australian dollars in fiscal 2019, $451 million in 2023, $511 million in 2024, $556 million in fiscal 2025 on revenue of about $2.9 billion, a 19% margin, with 17.6 million members and 222 billion points issued in a single year. Management's target: $800 million to $1 billion of profit by 2030. And here's the observation that matters most. Through the pandemic, while Qantas's flying business hemorrhaged billions, the loyalty segment stayed profitable every single year. That is the cleanest public demonstration in existence that the loyalty profit and loss statement is decoupled from the aviation cycle. The planes stopped, the points kept earning. But notice the margin: 19 to 25%. Solid, but nowhere near the 34 to 53% cash margins of the American programs. Why? Because Australia's card economics are real but thinner. So Qantas built something different: a coalition. Points on groceries at Woolworths, Australia's largest supermarket chain. Points on wine, insurance, home loans, hotels, over 800 partners. More diversified, more resilient, less explosive. The Australian program is a genuine national loyalty ecosystem. The American program is a credit card with a tail fin. Now Europe, where the natural experiment I mentioned in Chapter 5 plays out. Remember, the European Union capped credit card interchange at 0.3% in 2015, and the rich co-brand card died on the operating table. So what do European programs do instead? The quiet winner is IAG, the parent of British Airways and Iberia. Its loyalty division earned £280 million in 2023 and £420 million in 2024, at about a 17% margin. But its structural innovation is the currency itself. It's called Avios. Launched in 2011, Avios is now the single points currency of British Airways, Iberia, Aer Lingus, and Vueling. And then something genuinely new happened. Qatar Airways, a completely separate airline group, adopted Avios as its currency in 2022. Finnair followed in 2024. Stop and think about what that is. A frequent flyer currency shared across competing airline groups, spanning alliances. It is the closest thing loyalty has ever produced to a reserve currency, a hint of a future where the currency outgrows any single issuer. Air France-KLM ran the American playbook in European dress. In November 2023, it raised €1.5 billion of quasi-equity from Apollo, the American private equity giant, against an affiliate holding the Flying Blue trademark and partner contracts. The 2020 United structure, translated into French. And Lufthansa is the control group. Miles & More, Europe's largest program, is wholly owned, and Lufthansa discloses nothing about its profitability, the anti-Qantas. When the pandemic hit, Lufthansa didn't mortgage its loyalty program. It took €9 billion from the German state. Where American carriers monetized loyalty, European flag carriers monetized the taxpayer. Same crisis, different social contract. Keep going east. Emirates Skywards monetizes a lifestyle ecosystem. By the company's own figures, about 40% of its miles are earned on the ground, through hundreds of partners, without American-style card economics. Singapore Airlines gave the industry its cautionary technology tale. In 2018, it launched CreasePay, billed as the world's first blockchain-based airline loyalty wallet. The blockchain framing quietly evaporated, and the product survives as an ordinary merchant offers app. I want to be clear about why that failure was structural, not accidental. Genuinely tokenized, freely tradable miles would establish a market price for the currency, surely below the airlines, and destroy both breakage and price discrimination. Airlines will never volunteer for convertibility. The whole machine depends on the currency staying locked in the vault. India is the growth story, and it's running the film in reverse. Air India's Maharaja Club, overhauled under Tata ownership in 2024, grew from 3 million to 10 million members, and in 2026 it is cutting award prices on 90% of its routes, making the currency more generous. Why would a program do that when everything I've told you says devalue? Because India is a growth market, and in a growth market, loyalty is still about winning customers rather than milking them. Generosity is a customer acquisition cost. Every mature program you've heard about in this series ran exactly that play once, decades ago, before the arithmetic of maturity set in. And in the 2026 global valuations, the fastest riser in the top 10 was Air China's Phoenix Miles, nearly doubling in estimated value to $5.9 billion as China's domestic travel and card ecosystems mature. So what does the world tour teach us? Two things, and they're the two halves of my whole thesis. The universal part is seigniorage. Everywhere on Earth, in every regulatory regime, the loyalty program outturns the airline that hosts it on margin. Issue points cheap, settle them cheaper, keep the float, keep the breakage. That's not American. That's arithmetic. The American part is the scale. The $8 billion annual bank check exists because, and only because, American merchant fees are unregulated. Nowhere else does the machine reach a tenth of that size, which tells you exactly where to look for regime change, and when we get to the risks in Chapter 12, that is precisely where we will look. But first, we need to talk about what this machine does to the people holding the currency. It's time to talk about devaluation. Chapter 9, the Treadmill. Everything I've described so far, the 2-cent sale, the 1-cent settlement, the $26 billion liability, has a counterparty. The person holding the miles, you, and the historical record says, without much ambiguity, that the person holding the miles is on a treadmill engineered to run slightly faster than they can walk. This chapter is about the engineering. Recall the machine from Chapter 2. The award chart was the currency's posted exchange rate, 25,000 miles for a domestic round trip, a price that held for decades. And the charts are gone. Delta stopped publishing in 2015, United in 2019, American in 2023. Delta went revenue-based for earning in 2015, and one contemporary analysis found that a non-elite traveler on discounted fares would earn about a third of the miles the old system paid. American replaced flown mile status with loyalty points in 2022, making elite status fully earnable from your couch with a credit card. Each change was announced as modernization. Each also, not coincidentally, reduced what the airline owes per dollar of customer behavior. But let me quantify the treadmill properly, because we have good data, and the good data is damning. The consultancy IdeaWorks ran 600 standardized award booking queries across 6 American programs in March 2024, repeating exactly the methodology it used in 2019. 5 years apart, same questions. Findings: average economy award prices rose 28% in 5 years, against 21% general inflation. Southwest's average economy award nearly doubled, from about 7,400 points to about 14,500. Delta went from 19,700 to 26,800. United from 25,000 to 30,500. Interestingly, American actually fell from 23,700 to 17,800. Proof that dynamic pricing can cut both ways when a carrier wants engagement. The more damning metric is what IdeaWorks calls reward payback, how much reward value you get back per dollar spent on fares. Alaska, from 11.3% in 2019 down to 3.2% in 2024. Delta, from 5.4% down to 0.4%, not 4%, 0.4%. And the per mile value of a United mile, measured against economy awards in 2024, 0.7 cents. The folk wisdom 2-cent mile of the chart era is now a 1.2 to 1.4 cent mile by every published valuation, a 1/3 to 40% devaluation, on top of award price inflation. Now, I want to be precise about the economics here, because the lazy version, airlines are stealing your points, misses what's actually interesting. The rigorous version goes like this. The airline sells miles to banks today at a price anchored to members' perception of the currency's value. It settles those miles tomorrow at an exchange rate it will choose then. Its profit-maximizing policy is therefore the highest rate of devaluation that does not break perception. That is inflation targeting, but with the target set by a marketing department, no published index, and no central bank governor to fire. And the cause of the inflation is exactly what a monetarist would predict. Remember Chapter 5. The credit card factories are printing trillions of miles a year, 60+% of all issuance, while the supply of award seats grows with, at best, the fleet. Too much currency chasing too few seats. Jay Sorensen of IdeaWorks made the diagnosis precisely. The flood of card-issued miles created more demand and prompted airlines to raise reward prices. Programs, he wrote, are becoming travel reward delivery tools for co-branded credit cards and cash delivery tools for airline income statements. It is textbook currency debasement run deliberately by an issuer who also controls the price level. The airlines did not break their currencies by accident. The debasement is the business model working as designed. Which brings me to the one time in 45 years the mob won, because the exception illuminates the rule. September 2023. Delta announces a drastic SkyMiles overhaul, elite status based on dollars only, with thresholds jacked up and lounge access sharply restricted, including for holders of premium American Express cards. The revolt was ferocious, and here is the crucial detail. The most effective threat frequent flyers made was not "We'll fly United." It was "We'll cancel our Delta Amex cards." They aimed at the card revenue. Within 2 weeks, Chief Executive Ed Bastian at the Rotary Club of Atlanta, of all venues, said, and I quote, "We probably went too far. I think we moved too fast." And in October, Delta partially walked it back. The Diamond status threshold cut from $35,000 to $28,000, lounge access partially restored. Read that incident carefully, because it tells you where power actually lives in this system. Delta retreated not when flyers were angry. Flyers are always angry, but when the bank's revenue stream was threatened. The one force that disciplines the currency issuer is the bank, because the bank is the only customer who can actually leave. Members can't. That is what the switching costs are for, and note the shape of the retreat. Delta softened the degree and kept the direction. The spend-based architecture stayed. It always stays. Meanwhile, the earnings side is being fenced too. In April 2026, United overhauled MileagePlus so that flight mile earning now depends on holding the co-brand credit card. Cardholders earn up to double the miles per dollar on the same flights. The points press called it pay-to-play. Southwest, in the same 2 years, killed free checked bags and open seating, 50 years of brand identity, and rebuilt both as cardholder perks. Across the industry, the program and the card have effectively merged. The modern American frequent flyer program is a credit card rewards scheme with boarding priority. So where does the treadmill end? Here's the countervailing force, and it comes from Chapter 4, breakage. Airlines now need engagement more than forfeiture. The bank pays for believers, not for corpses. And you can see the constraint binding. By 2025 and 26, Delta's award values had quietly improved by independent tracking, even as its deferred liability grew toward $9.5 billion. A currency issuer, discovering it, must occasionally defend its currency. The equilibrium I expect, and this is my judgment, not a sourced fact, is a permanently two-tier system. Decent, defended value for high-spend cardholders whose economics the bank underwrites. Steadily eroding value for everyone else. The treadmill doesn't stop. It just gets personalized. Chapter 10, the gamers. Any system that issues a currency below its exchange value will attract arbitrageurs. It's a law of financial nature. And the 40-year war between the airlines and the people who game their programs is not a sideshow to our story. It is the market testing, continuously, whether the miles price is real. The gamers, you might say, are the program's short sellers. This chapter is their greatest hits. The founding legend is the pudding guy, and every detail I'm about to tell you is verified. In the spring of 1999, the food brand Healthy Choice ran a promotion. 500 frequent flyer miles for every 10 product barcodes you mailed in, doubled to 1,000 miles if you submitted by the early deadline. Somewhere in California, a civil engineer at UC Davis named David Phillips stood in a grocery outlet discount store, did the arithmetic that would make him immortal, and noticed that individual Healthy Choice pudding cups were selling for 25 cents each. 10 cups, $2.50. 1,000 miles. He was looking at a machine that converted quarters into airline miles at 100 miles per quarter. Phillips cleaned out 10 grocery outlet stores around Sacramento. 12,150 cups of pudding for $3,140, telling curious onlookers he was stocking up for White-A-K. Then he hit the labor problem. Peeling 12,000 barcodes before the deadline was impossible alone. His solution was the masterstroke. He donated the pudding to the Salvation Army in exchange for their volunteers peeling off the barcodes. The donation also earned him an $815 tax write-off. The payoff, 1,253,000 miles plus lifetime AAdvantage gold status, enough for 31 round trips to Europe. The stunt inspired a subplot in the Adam Sandler film Punch Drunk Love. And the economic point everyone misses. By 1999, the mile was already a real currency with a real exchange rate, and when a partner mispriced that exchange rate against the grocery shelf, an arbitrager printed money. The system didn't fail. The system worked exactly the way currency systems work. The United States government itself ran the biggest arbitrage of all. Starting in 2008, the U.S. Mint, under congressional mandate to get dollar coins into circulation, sold the coins online at face value. Free shipping. Credit cards accepted. The points community did the obvious. Buy $10,000 of coins on a miles earning card, wait for the boxes, drive them to the bank, deposit the coins, pay off the card. Free miles at taxpayer expense in industrial quantities. One enthusiast, Brad Wilson, reportedly bought about $3 million in coins and amassed roughly 4 million miles. The coins mostly never circulated. Banks shipped them straight back to the Federal Reserve, which by 2011 was sitting on more than $1 billion surplus dollar coins in its vaults. That July, the Mint finally stopped accepting credit cards. The scheme's epitaph: the government printed money so hobbyists could print miles, and the Fed ended up warehousing the evidence. Then the game professionalized, and the banks became the battlefield. In August 2016, Chase launched the Sapphire Reserve Card with an unprecedented 100,000-point sign-up bonus, and demand was so violent that Chase literally ran out of the metal the cards were made from. Jamie Dimon acknowledged a near-term earnings hit in the hundreds of millions. Reddit's churning community, several 100,000 members strong, systematized the harvest. Sign-up bonuses farmed on schedule, spending manufactured through gift cards and money orders, every bank's unwritten rules mapped in crowdsourced wikis. And the banks built counterweapons with folkloric names. The most famous is Chase's 524 rule: 5 new card accounts across all banks in 24 months, and Chase auto-denies you. Here's my favorite detail: Chase has never officially published this rule. It exists only as reverse-engineered forum data, an anti-churning policy that is pure folklore, yet so consistent that an entire strategy genre formed around it. American Express built its infamous pop-up jail, warning suspected gamers at the point of application that they won't get the bonus. The industry's internal term, in Amex's own fine print, is abuse of the welcome offer. The house started carding players at the door. When the airlines themselves counterattacked, they used the weapon only they possess: confiscation. The case study is the AAdvantage shutdown wave. For years, Citibank's targeted AAdvantage card mailers carried invitation codes that had no transfer restrictions, and the codes traded openly on Reddit for $5 to $50 each, letting churners repeat the same sign-up bonus indefinitely. It ran in public for years. Then, starting in December 2019, American locked accounts en masse and confiscated everything in them, including miles earned from actual flying, with no appeal. Some individuals lost millions of miles. A lawsuit followed in 2024. As we'll see in the next chapter, it faces nearly impossible legal odds. And the House polices its exchange controls ruthlessly. Mileage brokers, middlemen who buy award bookings from mile-rich members and resell premium cabin seats, are banned by every program's terms, Airlines void brokered tickets mid-journey, strand passengers at connections, and confiscate source accounts. A 2007 federal case, Alaska Airlines against a broker, confirmed the airlines can enforce the ban. Now notice the asymmetry, because it's the tell. The airline sells miles by the hundreds of billions to banks and sells them to you directly at 2 to 3 cents each. But member-to-member resale, which would establish a true market price, surely lower, is prohibited absolutely. That prohibition is the seigniorage. A convertible currency would break the machine, so the currency is not convertible. 2 codas. First, Skiplagged, the site that exposes hidden city ticketing, where a ticket from A to C through Hub B is cheaper than a ticket to B, so you book to C and walk away at the connection. It violates the fine print. It is not illegal. United sued Skiplagged's 22-year-old founder in 2014 and lost on jurisdiction. American sued on its home turf in Texas and won $9.4 million in 2024, but the jury awarded it entirely on copyright grounds for using American's logo. On the actual hidden city theory, nothing. The site kept operating. The airlines can punish the messenger. They cannot repeal the arithmetic of their own hub pricing. Second, the black market, which prices loyalty honestly. Stolen miles trade on dark web markets at roughly $1 per 1,000 miles, a tenth of a cent on the dollar. One documented listing sold a 250,000-point hotel account for $3.50. Industry groups estimate about 1% of all redemptions are fraudulent, a multi-billion-dollar problem, because miles accounts hold billions in value behind passwords people never check. And because miles are not legally money, no banking regulation protects them. Which is the perfect segue. Because the strangest thing about this entire currency is its legal status, a multi-hundred-billion-dollar asset class that sits almost entirely outside the law that protects every other thing you own. That's next. Chapter 11, The Law. The legal architecture of frequent flyer programs is genuinely remarkable. Here is a multi-hundred-billion-dollar private currency, held by well over 100 million Americans, that sits almost entirely outside consumer protection law. That is not an accident, and it is not an oversight. 2 Supreme Court cases built the wall, and I want to tell you both stories properly, because the second one involves a rabbi, and it is unimprovable. The first case grew out of the 1988 mileage wars from Chapter 2. American Airlines had retroactively imposed blackout dates, and capacity controls on miles customers had already earned. Illinois members sued under their state's Consumer Fraud Act, an ordinary consumer protection lawsuit of the kind that disciplines every other American business. The case, American Airlines versus Wolens, reached the Supreme Court in 1995. And the court held that the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, the very law that created the competitive scramble that created loyalty programs, preempts state consumer protection law as applied to those programs. States may not regulate an airline's rates, routes, or services, and the frequent flyer program is part of the deal. All that survives is bare breach of contract. Courts may enforce only the airline's own self-imposed undertakings. You can guess what the airlines did with that. They rewrote their contracts so that the central self-imposed undertaking is that nothing is undertaken. The airline may change the program, the earning rates, the redemption prices, the rules at any time, without notice, at its sole discretion. The one claim the Supreme Court left standing was drafted into hollowness. The second case closed the last loophole, and its facts belong in a textbook. Rabbi Binyamin Ginsberg of Minneapolis was a platinum elite on Northwest Airlines, flying roughly 75 times a year, lecturing on education. In 2008, Northwest terminated his membership for complaining too much. The airline's own account: 24 complaints in about 8 months, 9 reports of mishandled bags, $1,900 in travel credits, 78,500 goodwill miles, and then a clause invoked that let the airline judge abuse of the program, quote, in its sole discretion. The rabbi sued under the one doctrine seemingly left: the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, the old common law principle that no contract may be performed in bad faith. In 2014, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against him. Implied covenant claims are preempted too, when state law imposes them beyond the written words. Put Wolens and Ginsberg together, and here is the constitutional charter of the frequent flyer mile. The program is enforceable by the airline against you, and barely enforceable by you against the airline. Your $26 billion of miles, Chapter 4's number, exist at the issuer's pleasure. Every case since has hit this wall, and the 2024 lawsuit over the AAdvantage confiscations is hitting it now. Regulation had exactly one real moment, and I want to narrate its full arc, because it is a complete civics lesson in 18 months. May 2024, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Department of Transportation hold a joint hearing on rewards programs. September 5, 2024, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg sends formal orders to the chief executives of American, Delta, Southwest, and United, demanding records on devaluations, dynamic pricing, and fees. His framing was, I think, exactly right. Unlike a traditional savings account, these rewards are controlled by a company that can unilaterally change their value. December 2024. The CFPB warns that devaluing earned rewards may be illegal bait-and-switch under federal law. Then the administration changed. The airlines submitted their data. And then, nothing, no findings, no report, no enforcement. The probe was never formally closed, it simply went silent. I should label my inference honestly. That the probe is dead is my conclusion from the silence and the new Transportation Department's deregulatory posture, not an announced fact. The CFPB, meanwhile, was gutted outright, and the American Bankers Association has formally petitioned to withdraw even the written guidance. Hearing, demand letters, warning, election, silence. 18 months, start to finish. For scale, the only jurisdiction I can find on Earth that ever simply outlawed a devaluation tactic is the Canadian province of Ontario, which in 2016 banned expiring points for inactivity after a consumer revolt against the AirMiles program. It can be done. It almost never is. The tax story is the same surrender in a different key. For 20 years, the IRS circled the obvious question. Miles earned on employer-paid travel are compensation to the employee, surely they're taxable. And in Announcement 2002-18, the agency formally gave up. It will not assert tax liability for personal use of miles earned on business travel. The line survives today. Miles earned by buying things are untaxed rebates. Points received as a gift for opening a bank account are income. The tax court confirmed that in 2014, after Citibank startled customers with tax forms for their sign-up miles. So the largest perk in American business travel flows completely tax-free by explicit administrative surrender. And that phrase, miles earned on employer-paid travel, points at the deepest design feature of the whole system, the one Crandall's team understood in 1981. The frequent flyer program is a principal agent exploit. The employer pays for the ticket. The employee keeps the miles. The program is, functionally, a legal kickback paid to the purchasing agent rather than to the payer. It aims the entire incentive structure of business travel at the person who chooses the airline, but does not pay the bill. This is no longer just an insight, it's measured. A 2022 study in the journal Marketing Science, using actual booking data from a major American airline, found that travelers approaching elite status thresholds increasingly choose their airline even when it is worse and more expensive, and that the distortion is much stronger when someone else is paying. A separate study in Chile attributed a roughly 35% weekday fare premium on business-heavy routes to the dominant carrier's loyalty program. Employers pay it. Employees pocket it. And why do corporations tolerate an institutionalized kickback? Because enforcement costs morale, because the miles function as untaxed supplemental pay for road warriors blessed by the IRS, and because the managers who approve the travel are collecting miles themselves. Even the United States government capitulated. For decades, official rulings held that miles earned on government travel were federal property. In December 2001, Congress simply reversed it. Federal employees keep their miles. The world's largest employer concluded that policing the perk cost more than surrendering it. When the referee, the taxman, and the biggest employer on earth have all folded, you can say something stronger than the system is underregulated. You can say the system won. What's left to threaten it? That's the next chapter. Chapter 12, The Cracks. I have spent 11 chapters establishing that this is one of the best business models ever attached to a bad industry. Intellectual honesty now requires the stress test. If I'm going to tell you the machine is magnificent, I owe you a serious answer to the question, what could actually break it? Here are the cracks, ranked by how seriously I take them. Crack number 1, interchange regulation. This is the existential one. Remember the foundation from Chapter 5. The entire American co-brand bonanza rests on the fact that credit card swipe fees are uncapped, a deliberate carve-out in the 2010 Durbin Amendment. There is a bill designed to end that. The Credit Card Competition Act would force large banks to offer merchants a second, cheaper network for routing credit transactions, squeezing interchange toward the European experience. It has been introduced and stalled repeatedly since 2022. But in January 2026, it was reintroduced, and this time with Donald Trump's explicit endorsement, calling on Republicans to stop what he called the out-of-control swipe fee ripoff. The card industry is reportedly spending $200 million to fight the bill. Senator Durbin has hauled the chief executives of Visa, MasterCard, United, and American Airlines before the Judiciary Committee. And the airline CEOs have publicly predicted loyalty program doom if it passes. Here's the thing, they're not entirely bluffing. The European Union's 0.3% cap is the controlled experiment, and it killed the European co-brand card dead. If American credit interchange ever converges toward European levels, the $10 billion annual checks shrink toward European scale, and everything in Chapter 5 gets rewritten. There's also a quieter, already signed version of this risk. The revised $38 billion Visa and MasterCard merchant settlement, preliminarily approved by a federal judge in June 2026, gives merchants, for the first time, the right to surcharge or decline premium rewards cards specifically, by category. The mechanism that funds your miles, merchants silently paying 2.35% and passing it into everyone's prices, now has a legal crack in it. My read: full passage of the Competition Act remains unlikely in any given Congress. Concentrated benefits and diffuse costs are a durable political formula. But the direction of travel is one way, and the surcharging right erodes the economics at the margin regardless. Crack number 2, the consumer credit cycle. The miles machine is ultimately funded by American household card spending and household borrowing. As of early 2026, card balances stand at $1.25 trillion, and roughly 13% of balances are 90-plus days delinquent, the worst readings since the aftermath of 2008. Now recall the concentration. Delta's portfolio is 21% of Amex's worldwide card loans. A hard consumer recession cuts card spending, and the airline's highest margin revenue line decelerates in lockstep, at precisely the moment travel demand falls too. The counter-evidence is real. In 2008 and 9, United's revenue fell 19%, while MileagePlus revenue fell too. Loyalty is demonstrably the most resilient line the airlines have. But that resilience was tested when co-brand penetration was half of today's. The model has never seen a deep recession at current scale. That test is coming eventually, and nobody knows the answer. Crack number 3, two-sided concentration. Delta is 13% of Amex's billings. Amex's check is 14% of Delta's revenue and 1.4 times its operating income. Each company is the other's single biggest disclosed risk factor. This is a stable equilibrium. Mutual assured destruction usually is, right up until a renewal negotiation, a bank-side crisis, or a regulator forces the question. The current contract runs through 2029. Watch that date. Crack number 4, currency credibility. 2 decades of devaluation trained sophisticated consumers to earn and burn, and now the survey data shows the mass market drifting. In 2025, satisfaction among points card holders fell 12 points while cashback satisfaction rose, and among financially stressed consumers, points card usage share dropped from 31 to 27% in a single year. Meanwhile, the premium card arms race hit its couponified endgame. The Chase Sapphire Reserve at $795 a year, the Amex Platinum at $895, both stuffed with statement credits you have to work to redeem. And the lounges, the physical symbol of the whole promise, became so overcrowded that Delta, Amex, and Capital One all imposed caps, guest fees, and visit limits. The system needs 100 million people to believe. Belief is a depreciating asset, and the issuer's own optimal devaluation policy, Chapter 9, is what depreciates it. One more data point here. When the fintech tried to build a points program on rent payments without an airline's settlement engine behind it, its bank partner Wells Fargo reportedly lost about $10 million a month before exiting. Loyalty economics without a 1-cent redemption engine is just an expensive marketing program. And crack number 5, the memento mori. On May 2, 2026, Spirit Airlines, after 2 bankruptcies and a failed rescue, became the first major American airline to simply stop flying since 2001. Its loyalty-backed bondholders had already learned their lesson in the first bankruptcy. The holders of $1.1 billion of notes secured by Spirit's loyalty program and brand were not paid in full. They were converted into shareholders of an airline that then failed again. And Free Spirit members, the ordinary people holding points, discovered, the day the terminal went dark, exactly what a mile legally is. An unsecured IOU at the bottom of the creditor waterfall, behind everyone. Here's the two-sided lesson of Spirit, stated carefully. In a Chapter 11 reorganization, miles essentially always survive because the program is the crown jewel and every stakeholder needs the members engaged. History shows bankruptcy almost never kills a frequent flyer program, but in a liquidation, when the flying actually stops, the miles die with the airline. The loyalty-backed financing structures from Chapter 6 transfer risk, they do not eliminate it. The mile is only as good as the airline, and the airline, as we've seen, is increasingly only as good as the mile. That circularity is the system's foundation and its fault line, and Spirit is now the permanent marker standing on the fault. For completeness, 2 things I do not consider serious cracks: crypto and tokenized loyalty. Freely tradable miles would establish a market price below the issuers and destroy breakage and price discrimination. Airlines will never volunteer for convertibility, and every experiment so far has quietly died. And antitrust. When United and JetBlue linked their loyalty programs in 2025, Spirit, still alive at the time, objected that it was a coordinated oligopoly masquerading as competition. The regulator waved it through. Loyalty interoperability is becoming a soft consolidation tool that merger law doesn't clearly reach. That's a risk to consumers, perhaps. It is not a risk to the model. So 5 real cracks, none yet fired. What does it all add up to? Final chapter, the verdict. Chapter 13, the verdict. Let me assemble the whole machine one final time in a single pass. Everything you're about to hear, we have sourced over the past 2 hours. An airline mile is a privately issued currency. It is created at a marginal cost of roughly 1/10 of a cent. It is sold to banks for about 2 cents, funded, ultimately, by uncapped American merchant fees that are passed through into the price of everything everyone buys. It is settled later, at an internal transfer price of about 1 cent, in a product, the marginal airline seat, whose true cash cost is often lower still. When it is settled at all, a meaningful fraction of the currency simply dies unredeemed, and the issuer controls both the death rate and the exchange rate, unilaterally, with Supreme Court-blessed immunity from consumer protection law and an explicit surrender from the tax authority. The issuer's power is disciplined by exactly one counterparty, the bank writing the checks, which is why the only devaluation ever reversed in 45 years was reversed when the card revenue was threatened. On the airline's own filed numbers, this machine runs cash margins of 34 to 53%. It generated $25.8 billion of emergency collateral in 9 months of 2020, and it now outturns the operating income of the airlines that host it. So let me answer the question this series has been circling since Chapter 1. What is an airline in 2026? My answer, and I hold it with about 85% conviction, is that the major American carrier is best modeled as a 3-layer stack. On top, a utility-grade cash machine, the loyalty and card business, with recession-resistant, contractual, high-margin revenue. In the middle, a cyclical, capital-devouring, occasionally loss-making transportation business. And underneath, a premium experience engine, the lounges, the lie-flat cabins, the status ladder, whose real economic function is to keep the top layer's currency desirable. I mean that nearly literally. The planes exist to make the miles worth wanting. Consider the direction of causality in the current evidence. All of Delta's 2026 seat growth is going to premium cabins. In the fourth quarter of 2025, Delta's premium cabin revenue passed its main cabin revenue for the first time in American aviation history. And the loudest stated ambition of the most successful airline in America is not a route, not an aircraft order, not a market. It is growing a bank's annual check from $8 billion to $10 billion. Is it a good business? Let me answer for each party honestly. For the airlines and the banks, extraordinary. I'd argue the frequent flyer program is the single best business model innovation in post-war consumer finance, invented by accident as a fair war gimmick by people who thought it was a copyable trick. It transformed the worst major industry of the 20th century, an industry that, in aggregate, destroyed capital for decades, into hosts for $25 billion currency franchises. For consumers in aggregate, I judge it a regressive transfer with a genuinely satisfying user interface. Follow the money one last time. Everyone pays the interchange tax. It's embedded in retail prices at every store, charged to cash customers and cardholders alike. The rewards flow back to the creditworthy, high-spending minority who play the game well. The financially stressed, increasingly, the delinquent, fund rewards they rarely collect. The mile is a mechanism for moving money from everyone to the people with the best credit scores, wrapped in the feeling of getting something for free. It is a brilliant piece of financial engineering, and I do not think most of its participants would endorse its distributional arithmetic if they saw it plainly. And for the economy, it is a strange and fascinating artifact. America's second currency, 35 trillion units outstanding, run by 4 marketing departments with no monetary authority, no deposit insurance, no disclosure regime worthy of the name, and a customer base that mostly loves it. Is it durable? Here is my honest model. The machine's moat is not brand loyalty, and it is not the miles. It is a regulatory configuration, uncapped credit interchange, plus federal preemption of consumer protection law, plus tax exemption. That configuration has survived every challenge for 40 years because its costs are diffuse and invisible, and its benefits are concentrated and beloved. Political economy of that shape usually persists. My expectation is that 10 years from now the machine is larger, more premium skewed, more explicitly two-tiered, and still standing. But I promised falsifiability, so here are my tripwires, specific enough that you can check them yourself, and if they fire, you should downgrade everything I've said. 1. Interchange. If the Credit Card Competition Act or a successor passes with credit routing mandates, or if the merchant surcharging rights from the 2026 settlement measurably shift premium card spending within 3 years, watch co-brand remuneration growth. And if Delta's Amex check ever declines 2 years running outside a recession, the core thesis is broken. 2. The consumer. If points card wallet share keeps falling on the current survey trajectory for another 3 years, through a full cycle, then the belief asset is eroding faster than personalization can patch it, and the 2-cent wholesale price of a mile becomes unsustainable. 3. The renewal. The Delta and American Express contract runs through 2029. If that renewal lands materially below the $10 billion trajectory both parties have advertised, then the market's premier loyalty asset will have been repriced by its only real customer. Watch that negotiation like a hawk. 4. The accounting. Breakage assumptions are falling while award values must keep improving to sustain engagement. The spread is compressing from both ends. If a Big Three program ever reports loyalty cash margins below 25%, the golden age is over. And 5. The stress test. One deep consumer recession at current Cobran scale. If loyalty revenue proves cyclical after all, falling, say, more than half as much as passenger revenue, then the utility-grade layer of my model is wrong, and these programs deserve airline multiples, not fintech ones. None of those tripwires has fired as of August 2026, and so I'll close with the thesis, earned now rather than asserted. The most valuable thing at an American airline is not the airplane. It is not the route network, the slots, or the brand. It is the spreadsheet that remembers how many miles you have, and the machine, built by accident in 1981 and perfected by the banks, that converts your belief in that number into $8 billion a year of other people's money. Bob Crandall said the public was smarter than we were. 45 years on, I think the final scoreboard reads differently. The public got the free trips, the airlines got a currency, and the House, as always, got the spread. This has been an independent analysis based entirely on public sources, current as of August 2026. Nothing in it is financial advice. Thank you for listening.